Today, I'm excited to be joined by Mark McDermott, a partner at Amplify, a global creative agency known for its work with top brands like Adidas, Airbnb, Google, and Spotify. Named both Brand Experience Agency of the Decade and Global Experience Agency of the Year, Amplify specializes in creating culture and experiences that connect people, brands, and culture. With headquarters in London and hubs worldwide, Amplify's innovative campaigns set them apart as leaders in the industry. Mark, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me. Very honored to be what I think is the first one. So, excited to kind of dive into it a little bit and, appreciate a little intro. Certainly from my perspective, it's been a long time at Amplify. So, nice to kind of have someone else parrot back to you what we've managed to achieve in that time. But, really excited to be on the podcast.
Yeah, man. So maybe we can just kick it off with how did you get involved in this creative space?
Very good question. I actually took kind of quite an unorthodox route into kind of the creative agency landscape as we know it today. I actually studied economics at university, at college, and felt that was a route and a career that appealed to me. So when I actually finished university, I ended up working on the trading floor at UBS and ultimately then at Lehman Brothers, which subsequently collapsed whilst I was there. But that kind of set me on a bit of a path to, I suppose, ultimately kind of reevaluate what I was getting from my job, from my career, from my work, and started me on a path of kind of discovery, I suppose ultimately, which I'm still on today a little bit, but path of discovery in terms of what really inspired me to get up every day and go to work and ultimately kind of do what it is we do on a day-to-day basis. So I kind of actually then moved more into a bit more of a music space. I co-founded and kind of started an agency which worked predominantly really in the kind of the artist management promotions space as well. And one of the interesting things that they were doing was really at the genesis of music and branding. So back there was very little kind of in the way of kind of KPIs for music, spaces with brands. Brands really at that point were very open just to be kind of affiliated or connected to musicians or kind of cool artists in some way, shape or form. And that opened the door for us really to kind of, I suppose, ultimately test and learn on a lot of, music activations, experiences that intersected with brands at that level. So, one of the pioneers of a lot of the work that was coming out of a kind of a well-known British TV channel, Channel 4, which is very widely known as the kind of the creative channel, domestic channel over in the UK. We did a lot of work with like Hugo Boss, Ray and Nephew. So there's really the kind of the as I say, the initial trappings of what music and music branding turned into. And from there, I started to kind of really get much more into, I suppose, ultimately the part that creativity and culture can start to play in really shaping audiences and how audiences perceive both brands, the communications, and the products that they have within them. So that, as I say, that kind of kick-started a whole journey, and I moved through everything from kind of music strategy, music branding. I was working at an agency called Chord that were part of McCann, obviously the well-known above the line agency, working closely with them on everything from original scoring through to music and sonic branding, which was again something that we were very much at the forefront on, and then made my way through more into, I suppose, ultimately events, experiences. That terminology has definitely evolved over the last few years from experiential to brand experience to everything in between, but landed myself more in that space. And I think above all, the thing that stood out for me was how you could create experiences really that shifted the dial of audiences' perceptions around brands. And I think for me, when I landed in that space, it was ultimately the kind of, I suppose the kind of the culmination, if you will, of a journey of exploring different facets of the marketing mix, different approaches through strategy, creative execution, and landed me very much in a space that I felt very at home in, one that, allowed me to kind of execute and drive fantastic experiences, but also allowed me to kind of have creative steer in some way, shape or form, which was, for me was really exciting. And one I think that landed in my passions without having to do my passions. I think often, people talk about, don't always necessarily do the thing that you're really passionate about, because it can often kind of pull the curtain back a little bit on, on what that industry or what that, subset of companies can look like. And I think that was probably very much the case for me in music, but it allowed me to kind of maintain, I suppose, ultimately a foot in culture, in music, but all the while, I think doing it through the lens of business, the lens of, driving efficacy, driving, suppose whatever it might be, brand awareness, salience, whatever that might be, in a way that felt like it was marrying two of my kind of passions, which is, the creativity, the cultural aspect, but also the business aspect, and how to really ultimately kind of drive, change through those mediums. So broadly how I kind of got to this space.
Yeah, that's really interesting. How did you get from all that previous experience to being part of launching this new agency? How did that transition go?
Yeah, I think, as I said, my background, ultimately really through, banking, more of the operational side of things as well, gave me a firm platform and a base when it comes to, I suppose, ultimately the nuts and bolts of the business, how you start to kind of create something out of nothing, and, the structures and the frameworks that are needed in order for that to be a success. Within, I suppose, ultimately Amplify, I've been very lucky to, move through predominantly the kind of the client services space, and that has been developing a number of brands across the board. So you mentioned Airbnb at the top of the call. That was one that I brought in very much at the get-go in 2014, one that I developed from the ground up, and one of our, still to this day, biggest clients. So for me, um, developing and building something out of nothing is something that kind of feels, relatively natural to how I approach things. Um, and I think the US is something that as an agency we've been looking to try and tackle, conquer, call it what you will, for quite some time. Amplify is about 16 years old, so we're relatively young when it comes to the agency landscape, but old enough to really, be considered now, certainly in the UK, one of the best, if not the best kind of brand experience agency that there is. And we'd always kind of had a look at, New York, LA, one of those two markets, and what that would really mean for us as an agency, almost, I think, as the next kind of frontier of growth. So I think when those two, I suppose, ultimately those two kind of opportunities merged, there was a personal situation that meant that I was able to kind of come out here to the US, and it felt natural to, I suppose, ultimately look to see what we could achieve out here. And, from very much a position of humility, and we're not, certainly not coming in here and, pretending that we're, the top of the walk by any stretch of the imagination. But I think knowing what we do know and having the confidence that we do have as an agency in terms of what we stand for, the type of work that we create, and I think the ethos that underpins it all, we felt there was a seismic opportunity that we could kind of go after. And, from my perspective, the next logical step, from building clients was building agencies. So I think that was my natural progression, and I'm still here 2.5, 3 years on, and so we're doing something right, and we continue to grow, and across the board, it's really exciting in terms of what we have achieved and what we think we can achieve here. And I think it's our predictions, if you will, in terms of what value we could bring to clients is, I think, across the board, playing out not too dissimilar to what we thought as well. So the planning and the execution of that has been really on point. So that's great to know.
It's interesting starting something from nothing. That's quite a task. How do you go about starting, in terms of like the business development side of things, starting out in a new market? Did you sort of have a plan, or how did that sort of how'd that come together?
Yeah, I think we always had a plan of how we wanted to approach it. I think there's a plan, and then there's the reality of what that looks like. And I think starting any new business, you have to be kind of comfortable being in the uncomfortable from the get-go, right? And I think you can plan all you want to the high houses, and predict that it's going to go in a particular way, and that, the reality is very different to that. So we're very lucky that the client list that we have as a global group agency is so stellar. It's something that we've been incredibly proud of as an agency, certainly since I've been there, which is close to 10 years now, and much beyond. It's been very much a part of the agency from the first day. So I think when we're looking at the types of clients that we have, we're already looking at a subset of clients that are, you know, international, for want of a better phrase, kind of, I suppose, investors in audience-led consumer marketing. So for us, that allows us to, I suppose, have a basis to build from, right? It doesn't necessarily mean that we're going to get, briefs coming in the door immediately, but, in a number of those, I suppose, examples and clients that we do have, what it allows us to do is just maybe put our foot in the door and kickstart a number of, conversations in the right areas as well. And again, a lot of this has laddered up to how we are driving the reputation of the agency, the recognition of the agency in market, and we do that through a number of different methods and verticals. And I think within that, then it's about partnering with the right, sometimes kind of partners and intermediaries and kind of oyster catchers, if you will, to try and start to position us. I think it's about ensuring that you have a really refined and pointed POV and narrative, and sometimes that narrative shifts and changes from other areas of the business, right? So how we potentially communicate around Amplify in the US may be different to how we communicate around Amplify to UK clients. So quickly having to learn, what did stick, what didn't stick, and constantly iterating and refining that is kind of quite critical to ensure that you're not kind of making the same mistake over and over again. So, within, I suppose, combination, if you will, of that, intermediary contacts, huge word of mouth. I think for us, one of the big things and one of the big successes is that by finding the right talent, often either clients follow talent, or talent allows us to have conversations with past clients. And actually, we've found an enormous amount of success by ensuring that we pick, the right talent at the right time, and having new business very much as an active conversation with them, in that kind of recruitment process as well. Coupled then with more of a kind of a press recognition angle where we're looking at things like, how we're positioning the agency in things like awards, how we're using strategy and thought leadership as a way to, I suppose, put out in the world what our take on particular cultural elements or cultural points may be is critical. And then I think, beyond that, we start to look at, potential cultural moments that we can start to disrupt, or again, just have a bit of a POV on, so that clients that may use different mechanics to search for new agencies in an RFP process are able to kind of really quickly a new agency in the mix that's got a point of view that's really interesting to hopefully bring them on board. So definitely a multifaceted approach. And I think when you're looking at, starting a new business in a new market, and a market that doesn't really know much about you as an agency, it's about almost just kind of throwing spaghetti at the wall a little bit and seeing what sticks, and, going, right, okay, great, that didn't work. And, again, in that being comfortable in the uncomfortable, being able to iterate super quick, so that every time you're picking up a new brief or a new conversation, that you're learning from the things that you're seeing prior to that. I mean, it's an interesting one, I think, because as an agency, we pride ourselves on being very always on with our new business. We don't necessarily adhere to kind of locking in 4 or 5 clients and then accepting that that's it for our fiscal year. We really like to kind of continue looking to build, client subset. We also like to continue, obviously, building the kind of the mix of the sectors that we have within the business. And I think for us, what that does mean is that certainly at a leadership level, we are, the skill set of fighting and selling and developing new business is very much at the top of what we do on a day-to-day basis. It's not something where, 4 months later, you're like, oh, you've got to dust off the old pitch jacket, get it back on, and see how it feels about going out and speaking to new clients. Actually, for us, it's an always-on approach, right? So I think that really helps us, because we're, as a senior leadership team, we're able to kind of drop into these conversations so quickly, we're able to kind of adapt to what we think that client might want, so that we're not just essentially providing a cookie cutter approach to every single client. Actually, it's about, I'm not saying that they are a client, but if Diageo wanted to kind of chat about something and Nike want to chat about something else, we're able to kind of really quickly adapt and plug and play to ensure that what they're hearing is relevant to their business, is relevant to their product, is relevant to their audience. And within that, hopefully that means that they get a better sense of us as talented individuals and talented teams to really help them with their business challenges.
Is it tricky to scale based on certain projects? Do you guys work with a lot of freelancers or kind of rely on, what's your structure?
Yeah, I mean, I won't go into too much detail, obviously, to spill all the beans, but yeah, I think that most agencies run a freelance model, as we do as well. I think the critical thing is, and one of the things that we've definitely found since being in the US is, you know, the business lives or dies based on the mix of that, and how we approach hiring in the right areas at the right times to ensure that the business has time to scale in order to kind of support that as well. But I think, we've been lucky that the growth of the agency here in the US has been such that, that's given us the freedom to kind of build in the right areas as a business. And we will forever still run a freelance model, absolutely. And I think, there are certain things that a freelance model gives you, which I think are critical for an agency, which is, particular skill sets. It may be that it allows you to, I suppose, move into particular clients that may or may not have been accessible because of particular individuals that they always want to work with. So I think there's always benefits to that. And I think ultimately as well, it allows the agency to kind of stretch itself as much as it can when it comes to exciting opportunities that might not necessarily be available to us if we were just taking that kind of full-time core team and their availability within that. So it's a fundamental part of our business, and it's one that has allowed us to, thankfully, successfully navigate where we are today. It will continue to be a part of our business as we grow across the board, for sure.
Cool. Yeah, that sounds like it's consistent with a lot of the agency owners I speak with,
Yeah.
and sort of how you have things structured. I was just curious because I come from a hiring background, so I'm always trying to I wonder what's going on over here. What, how, or, in all different companies, how they scale and what works and what doesn't. I know that, folks that listen to this podcast, I think many are going to be agency owners that are sort of, or maybe they're folks that are looking to start their own agency and wondering how do you start? What's the beginning structure look like? What are those first, what kind of things do we have to put in line here before we open our doors? I think it's definitely interesting to know, how everybody works internally.
Yeah, I think that what I will say in terms of a little bit more detail is the dance, if you will, is that you can get to a pretty senior, top-heavy space quite quickly, right? Because, as an agency that's just starting out, you need senior individuals either to sell the work or do the work, or deliver the work. So the balance really is how do you ensure the right mix and the right individuals are there to be able to do that without putting yourself in a position that all of a sudden you're staring down the barrel of a significant overhead because, lots of senior people have come in and, they've excited you, or they've piqued your interest in terms of what they're able to do on a day-to-day basis. But as the peaks and troughs of work start to work through the pipeline, the business may or may not have the stability to hold that. So I think, certainly as you're starting out as a business, definitely putting in plan where you think those absolutely critical roles might be. But also, I think one of the things that we've done, I think, relatively successfully, is that we've been very clear with people that as a start, even though we do have the mothership, London, which has been around for 16 years, which you could in no way, shape or form really classify as a startup. It's a very established business, certainly in Europe. We here in the US fundamentally are a startup. There is, the way that we are navigating and comporting ourselves as a business very much is a kind of roll your sleeves up, scrappy approach until we get enough structure. And, we're kind of getting to that point now, but we're not to get enough structure really to kind of solidify areas in an operational and kind of recruitment and structural perspective to really be able to deliver what you're looking to do at scale. But I think really at the start of it, one of the things that we really looked to try and instill with everyone that kind of came in the door was that we really couldn't have, individuals in swim lanes. We needed people to be, looking either side of them to see what gaps needed filling and then to work collaboratively together to ensure that those gaps were being filled. So I think more often than not, when we were looking to hire very early on, we were looking to hire more like entrepreneurial people. And it's something that I think we continue to kind of try and drive as a core tenet of individuals that want to join Amplify. Like, what is that sense of entrepreneurialism? What is that sense of, being able to do so much more because you're open to and perceptive to the needs of the business as and when they arise, so that ultimately you're all kind of providing each other with that safety net, and that you're all trying to kind of make sure that if something gets missed over here, it's, it isn't the process that's catching it at that time, because that doesn't really exist. So you're all kind of working together to kind of put your arms around that particular piece of work or that, particular process to kind of do that. So I think that's maybe something that we've really been kind of quite pointed at when we've looked at recruitment. Like, does this individual strike you as an individual that isn't going to go, right, cool, 5 p.m, I don't really care if everyone else is floundering, I'm done for the day and I'm out of here. Actually, I think we've been really successful in building a team of individuals that care about each other, which I think for us from a cultural standpoint is super important, but one that they also understand that they're in a startup world that is going to need all of us to to be fluid in how we respond to those challenges.
Totally. Is it sometimes hard with those folks that have that entrepreneurial spirit to have them stay? Do you sometimes feel like they're kind of maybe looking to start their own thing at times, or do they feel like that has never been really an issue?
I think in terms of the startup mentality or kind of fabric of a company isn't for everyone, and I think you kind of get a sense pretty quickly if someone is more inclined to do their work for the day and leave, which is, again, totally fine. They are probably more suited to big structural corporations, agencies, whatever you want to call them, that have been around for 30 years, really clear in terms of where their client list is. There is that I wouldn't say stability, but there is that kind of consistency, if you will, of the client list that they have, the type of work they're doing, the team that's going to be there, etc., etc. I think one of our successes as an agency is that we are actually really comfortable being agile and fluid. We talk a lot with our clients around, being able to scale up and scale down super quickly, whether it's like a small cultural platform that we're designing for someone, the likes of like Dr. Martens, that can be very kind of grassroots orientated, very niche, whether it's, a global 20 odd country launch of the PlayStation 5. We are able to kind of scale up and scale down super quickly, because I think the basis of that is built on individuals that are super entrepreneurial and can just move super quickly. I think in terms of, to answer the question a little bit more directly, like we really celebrate that individuals have their own things in play. We don't necessarily castigate for that. Like, lots of the individuals that work at Amplify have everything from, their own small brands or run their own parties or, whatever that might be. And I think for us, providing them a space and a platform to be celebrated through that, I think provides them with a home where they feel that entrepreneurialism and that kind of collaborative, creative spirit is very prominent. So, I think in many senses that's aided, and it's kind of inspired a lot of those individuals to very much continue and develop their own particular, avenues, whether that be, some of them are even brands. We've got a couple of individuals that have now gone off to be founders in startups. We've got one in the FMCG space that's doing fantastically well, and I think we love celebrating that. So I think it's always an environment we want to create. It's always an environment we want to celebrate, and hopefully for us that means that we get the best out of them, and for them, that means that they push us to get the best out of us as well.
Yeah, I like your philosophy there. What campaign, are there any standout campaigns that you know really that you really love it that you've done over the years that you would like to talk about? I'm
For
sure
me
there's been
personally,
plenty, but yeah.
God, yeah, I mean, look, I recently worked on one for Lego that was fantastic. What we did, we were recently engaged to celebrate their 90th anniversary of Lego, and that was going to coincide with the World Play Day, which is something that they, a day that they obviously leverage pretty consistently to kind of shine a light on all the wonderful things that Lego do across the board. But the brief was pretty simple, which was really how do we bring play to areas that maybe don't have the luxury of play, be that inner cities, be that areas where children don't necessarily have access to play on a day-to-day basis, and how can we shine a bit of a light on those and, um, you know, put play really at the heart of that and try and give them some of that joy and that happiness back. And I think the interesting thing about the brief was the simple answer would have probably been take an inner city space and drop something in it from Lego and just kind of hand it over. I think, one of the wonderful things that we managed to do with the brief was give creative control to what are the world's best creative directors, which is kids themselves. So we set them a brief to, we actually selected a space in Harlem, New York. We worked with a local organization called Brotherhood Sister Soul, who do a wide body of fantastic work with the local community when it comes to everything from kids all the way up to kind of senior adults, a wide ranging support across the community. We worked with them to kind of bring about 40 individual small children to come in and really just, use Lego to showcase what creativity and what play meant to them. And then we worked with an artist called Hebrew Brantley, who you may know, to almost take some of those and blow them up into a kind of life-size playground, which we built in its entirety. And then, we built that in Harlem, launched that to the entire community, and handed it back to them, really. And that was something that was with them for about half a year. And you can only imagine the permitting and the approval process that needed to take place with the New York City Council, with the I Love New York Council, the fire department, and everything in between that. So, but I think what it was I think a wonderful opportunity to take a kind of what would be regarded as a kind of straightforward CSR project, but really allow the audience to kind of co-collaborate and co-create that with us. And the audience really was, those young, small creative directors that, were far more equipped than we were to shine a light on what play meant for them. And one that I think, from our perspective as an agency was wonderful to kind of be able to hand over to the city of New York. So yeah, I'd say probably that's definitely one of my favorites, and kind of aligns as well with a brand that I think, the more I've worked with, the more I have been blown away with, I think, the levels of diligence that go into the communication and the layering of that brand. It really is, phenomenal organization from front to back, and it never ceases to astound me the level of detail and thought that goes into creating the worlds around Lego, in whatever kind of, I suppose, IP space exists within that, enormous juggernaut of a company. But yeah, I'd say that's probably my favorite one recently.
Yeah, that sounds really cool. That's a great story. Curious what your thoughts are on just sort of like the changes in the industry of late. I know there's obviously like a lot of technological advances and things, machine learning, AI. The world is obviously changing pretty fast. How are those sort of things impacting your work currently?
Mm, I mean, I think technology has impacted our work for many, many years. I don't think, AI or the metaverse has necessarily all of a sudden brought technology into our kind of peripheral vision or even our kind of field of vision directly. But I think for us as an agency, what we're always trying to get to, what is the authentic use case for the technology that you've got in front of you or that you want to use? and how do we move away from technology for technology's sake to actually provide innovation in a way that feels aligned with the consumer and that feels like it bridges the gap between the consumer, the brand, and the product. And I think that's a lot easier said than done. I think if you look at probably a lot of examples across the board, certainly in the kind of the metaverse, most recently, you can see, I think, a lot of bad examples of brands that have almost just tried to get into that space without necessarily thinking about the value to the audience or the value of the kind of the communication from the brand itself. So I think that's something that we're trying to, I suppose, on a day-by-day basis. And, it's important for us that, again, we're looking at technology through that lens rather than simply trying to crowbar the latest fad or the latest trend into a particular campaign. And I think brands, respect that. I think we're often in scenarios where we'll talk about, how does AI impact this, or, and I think we'll always be very honest in terms of like, there may have been kind of creative routes that we've discarded because we haven't felt that the technology has been the right thing to answer that challenge. So that's, I think, from our perspective, our ethos in terms of how that approach shows up in our work. But we have internal initiatives. We run a kind of an internal kind of research group called Creative Futures or Amplify Futures, which is essentially, it's almost like kind of an incubator for experiments across the board that allow us to test and learn on innovation technology without necessarily having, the brand lens being ever present in that. So it allows us to start to explore and in some senses, and in some instances, create IP. And I think then what that means is that by the time, hopefully, and ultimately, if we do start to plug it into responses or we do start to talk to brands about how we could incorporate those particular elements, that, we've got such an understanding of how it works and we've kind of almost, pushed and pulled it around so much that, it does become a little bit more kind of, a little bit easier to kind of integrate those types of things in the responses that we have, either in play or conversations that we might have with brands to particularly, to look at how innovation could potentially impact some of their business challenges as well. So, we're definitely very front-footed in terms of how we develop both our knowledge and the ecosystem around technology and innovation generally at Amplify. And I think, the point I was making around doing that in an authentic way means that when we do have that knowledge and that understanding, we're not just kind of plugging it into things for want of a better word, for no sake whatsoever, but it's actually being added. It's adding value to how we really communicate to the audience and give them hopefully a bit more of an authentic connection with the brand and one that feels generally very innovative and very fresh and very new.
Yeah. Are you guys working with internal teams for the brand as well? Is it sort of a collaboration on that side, or do most of the brands kind of just say, you guys run with it?
Well, I think it can come from many different areas. I think we, as an agency, have our own level of curiosity across the board. We've got a number of individuals that sit within the studio that have got technology backgrounds, are creative technologists, very much at their core and their heartland. So, there is an inherent curiosity from us as an agency to want to explore and to, pursue experiments that give us a greater understanding of how that technology or any technology is starting to develop. And then I think from there, it's, it can go both ways. We can have a little bit more of a kind of a broader brushstroke conversation with clients and actually, we'll go, that works really well, or something we've been working on over here could be really interesting. Or it could be that, the brief is quite specific. They are looking for innovation in this particular area, and then we can actually, plug that straight in as well. So it just means, I think, that we are challenging ourselves to be knowledgeable and, industry leaders for our clients. And that's ultimately what they're looking for us to do, right? They're looking for us to be intelligent, creative, thought leaders, and they're looking to us really to kind of creatively challenge them, to inspire them. So I think ultimately it's incumbent upon us to, continue driving that curiosity and making sure that we're on the front foot of how that world around us is changing, and and the implications of what that means in our industry, right? Which I think is becoming more and more profound, and I think is also kind of changing the way we're connecting and engaging audiences across the board.
Totally. I guess one more question for you, Mark. Outside of just doing the agency stuff and which is not just doing the agency stuff, it's a lot of stuff. I didn't mean to say it in that way. Where I'm getting at is, what else can you do, or what else do you do personally to do? Is there what's in your life outside of the agency? Is it like meditation, or like working out, or is mindset stuff, or playing your guitar, or what sort of things make you tick out, in this world that outside of work?
It should be meditation. It's actually funny. We often use this as a
Hey, you
closing
seem pretty stressed
question
out
to.
right now, Mark.
No, we often use it as a closing question with a lot of people, and you'd be surprised at how many people stutter and feel that there's a subtext to that. But no, quite a lot, to be honest. A big avid record collector, so yeah, I've been personally running parties and other such things in London and here in LA for best part of 15 years. I actually run I suppose what would be kind of like an intimate pop-up hi-fi bar in Venice, in California. So that's once every 2 months affair. So that's, again, building something entrepreneurial in that sense, a little bit akin to what we were saying earlier, right? Like, how do I think one of my passions is like, how do you engage those communities and really get into them? And music for me is a deep passion, and something like the hi-fi bar is something that allows me to really kind of get deep into that. But beyond that, big skier. I do a lot of big mountain skiing, so a lot of backcountry kind of free rides, touring, that kind of stuff. And I'll probably leave it at that. That's two relative big ones, but yeah. That's
Well, we have a house in Vermont. I'm actually in Vermont right now. So if you're ever in the around the Green Mountain State and you're looking to ski, look me up. You can always have a
is it
place
good
to
skiing around there?
stay.
Good skiing around there?
It's pretty nice. Yeah. I mean, I
Nice.
think people that are like, if you were like from Colorado, you might think that Vermont is sort of maybe not not the Holy Grail, but as far as the Northeast goes, it's very beautiful here. We do get obviously a lot of snow, and yeah, it's just there's a lot of just good vibes. The people here, it's a good place to kind of just like unwind and get in touch with nature. So
Great.
if you're ever looking to get your
Excited about my
outdoors fixed,
invitation to
definitely
head
let
up
me
there.
know. Yeah, come on down. But cool, Mark. Thanks so much for sharing your story, and it's really been a pleasure. And thanks for taking the time out of your day and giving us your insights. I appreciate it.
No, really, really great fun to kind of dive into it, and appreciate you having me on. So thank you so much for that.
Awesome, Mark. Appreciate it. Have a great rest of your week.
Great. You too, man. Lovely chatting.